Welcome to another edition of More Throwing Out Throwing. My name is Jamal Binding. I'm the chair of the board. And in this segment, we will bring on our guests. And obviously, as you're aware, those of who've been following us, that we try to bring challenging, interesting people in our community to talk about issues related to different topics, but also to talk about race. So in the studio today with us, we have Melody Vaccaro, who is a founding member and director of Nebraska Against Gun Violence. I've known her for a number of years. She is the president of the board. She's originally from Papillion and served in the Peace Corps in Bulgaria. We have something in common. I was in the Peace Corps in Botswana. I met her, like I said, a number of years ago. She was there from 2005 to 2007. She was recently invited to the White House to talk about issues related to gun violence and some of those issues on the national level. Like I said, I met her when they were working with a group of folks with improve relations with the community and discord related to violence in our community, particularly gun violence. So Melanie has kind of a little history with me, and I really wanted to make sure that we get a chance to invite her on to talk about some of the recent involvements of her organization and how we and talk more about gun violence, reduction of guns in our community, and deal with that. So Melanie, with that, without further ado, share a little bit more about yourself to the listener, viewing audience.
Yeah. So my name's Melody, like you said, and I am one of the founding members of Nebraska Against Gun Violence. We're an organization that really focuses on education and advocacy around the topic of gun violence. What is it actually? What are the myths? What are the realities? Where do people generally agree? Where's there's a lot of dissonance and we need to do more work coming together? That's kind of our space, and that's what we do, and that's what I'm proud to be a part of.
Okay. Now, one of the things you talked about, Nebraska's, organization dealing with gun violence and so on, Nebraska's gun violence. You're not a direct service agency. Consider lobbying, advocacy, educational, or what? How do we define a little bit more about your organization?
Organization as an education-based model. So what we do is we have, and we're really just coming back to it, right? So we've kind of taken a pandemic pause, like a lot of groups, we're coming back to it. But what we've traditionally done and what we're getting back to doing is educating people about the issue, educating people about what's coming up, either at a city level, at a state level, and then helping people have the tools and resources that they need to do the advocacy that they want to do.
And many understand that the Constitution protects and have safeguards for guns, for citizens have guns in our society, and I understand that and respect that in a sense and understand that. Again, part of it has to do with the military, and for back in the day where people wanted to safeguard themselves against government entities or so on taking advantage of them. How can we balance the constitutional rights of a gun and gun controller issues as infringement on their constitutional rights? So how do you make sense of that? So how do you argue that?
For starters, I don't argue it. I think it is generally a red herring argument. It's usually brought by people who come to argue in bad faith, right? The Second Amendment literally uses the term well regulated. So this is not even worth arguing if that's what they're standing on. I recently went into a shooting range for some business, and they had a giant sticker decal on the wall, and it said, the first sentence of the Second Amendment, and they literally left off the second sentence, the well-regulated part. Right. So I just won't engage in that debate because it's ridiculous. Obviously, we can have norms and rules, and as a society, we can do things so that we don't have the levels of gun violence that we have in this country. It is ridiculous to say that a bunch of old white guys hundreds of years ago created a document, and so we can't do anything about guns being the #1 killer of children in America. That's absurd. So that's how I would respond to that.
Well, the other point you raise is are you against people having guns in general in their homes, your organization, or is that like you use the word red herring in a sense? But
Mhm.
do people have a right to have a gun in their house based upon our laws and constitution, things like that?
Certainly, that's well established precedent in the law. And I think our membership varies greatly on where they personally feel about it. The organization, if you hate guns and wish every single gun in America was melted down and turned into a statue, we're with you. If you love to go to the shooting range, but you just think people shouldn't be walking around with AK-47s down the street, we're with you. There is such a broad range of things we need to do. And some of these littler arguments are just, they get in the way of the real work. And the real work is, how do we keep kids safe at school without putting a bunch of cops in their school?
Right.
How do we make sure that people can vote and participate in city meetings without people bringing assault weapons to threaten people with different views than them? Right? Like, those are like really meaty topics. So that, people, and it's worth, I'm glad you brought it up, because that is kind of where people start, right? Where they're like, well, I have a gun and I'm not a bad person. You're like, well, yeah, but that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about you being a bad person. We're saying people leave guns in their cars, teenagers take them out of the cars, and then they end up killing themselves or others and have a lifelong journey into the criminal justice system because somebody didn't keep their gun out of their car. If that's you, then yeah, we're talking about you. But if that's not you, then we're not talking about you.
Right. Understand. Good. Now, recently, we've seen an uptick of gun violence in Nebraska, in spite of some of the rhetoric and stuff we see in the newspaper, like gun violence or violence is going down. Again, you always got to question the data, but again, one violent act is too many in our communities. Particularly in North Omaha, we've seen that. African Americans have one of the highest incidents in terms of racial percentages of gun violence in Nebraska. I'm not saying they have the most guns. I'm just saying high percentages based on their population, or as we use the word, proportionality. What can we do to go upstream to reduce those numbers from your organization or your vantage point, Melanie?
Well, there's a couple different things that can be done, but I want to say specifically what we know is that when concealed carry became the law of the land in Nebraska, we saw within 10 years of that passing, we saw Black homicide numbers creep up to be number one in the nation in 2016, right? And then we have been seeing them creep back down after that peak. And so now we're hovering around 20s or 30s in the net, with one being the worst, most violent number, right? And so those numbers are creeping back down. But when I just looked at the CDC data, they're starting to go back up. Is that a longer term trend? Is it an anomaly? It's too early to tell. So what all that is to say, what I know is Omaha's doing a lot of things right to get those numbers back down. And there's not going to be, well, if we just do this one thing, that's going to resolve our problems. There's already a lot of right things happening. What we did see, and I'm not surprised to see the numbers going up this year all around the country, during the pandemic, people were freaked out. There wasn't enough toilet paper. People were very concerned, when you reach a level and find out this infrastructure of your country is so unstable, we don't have enough toilet paper for people to go out and buy a few extra packages in an emergency all at the same time. That's scary. And people armed up. They armed up, they bought firearms, and they bought massive amounts of ammunition. They sold out gun stores all across the nation, including in Nebraska. And everybody did that in every demographic: liberal, conservative, Black, white. That was happening across the country. So it's crystal clear. There is mountains of every research study that's ever been done says when there are more guns, you're going to have more gun violence. And it is just a fact. We have more guns in every community in this state, every single one. And a lot of those people didn't get any training. A lot of them are new gun owners, don't even know what they're doing. They bought guns because they were freaked out, which is a fear-based decision and is not usually the most thought through and logical. People don't make their most logical choices or rational choices when they're freaked out. That's just part of being human. So, we got to deal with these guns, right? So we need to do things like, to get back to your original question, what do we do, right? We need to keep doing the good community work that Omaha's doing, right, around community violence. But we also need things around suicide prevention. We need to talk about guns when we talk about suicide prevention and stop acting like it's a dirty word. Over half the gun deaths, over half of the suicide deaths use a firearm, and most of them are men. We need to be talking to men more. We need to have men hold themselves and their friends more accountable. And that's definitely something culturally we're not doing. But the data is just crystal clear. These are the places we need to go, and we need to lock up guns and keep them away from kids.
As you were talking about the gun issues and the pandemic, and it became so much humorous to me because you just see people going out, people go with a gun trying to rob a toilet paper store because, again, it's all related. And I wish our academic community, particularly in the criminal justice field, would do more research on that because, again, as you said, the numbers and studies show that. But I would like to be more specific to Nebraska, Omaha, Lincoln, and some of the smaller communities. And I know you keep alluding to Omaha. Are these same situations happening in Lincoln or other rural communities in our state, what you're talking about? And I know you're a statewide agency, so I'm throwing that back out.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So as Omaha is the biggest city in the state, we're going to see things that have to do with population density, like homicide numbers. That's going to be a population density, and Omaha is the biggest city, most densely populated. So we're going to see things like firearm homicides and all. That's just they're going to naturally be concentrated in our biggest city, right? And then also, due to decades and decades of systemic gerrymandering, we have put our not the entire, right, but we have the Black part of the state, right, North Omaha, and we've made it into a triangle. We've got a river on one side, we've got 75 on the other side, then we've got 680 on the other side, right, or 4. I'm getting my interstates mixed up, but right, so we've triangled it in, and then we have systemic, all the things that you think of that create community violence of all types. We've got all those factors. We've got food insecurity, housing insecurity. And then we do that on purpose. And we tell those people who live there, if you could just bootstrap it a little more, then maybe you wouldn't be literally stacking everything against people. So we're going to see all of that is to say is we're going to see higher homicide numbers. Like that is what happens when you do all those things over history and continue them today. You're going to see higher homicide numbers. So yeah, Omaha's the highest homicide numbers, and Black homicide is disproportionate to the population by 4 times, right? Wow. We would expect, based on what the Black population is to the state of Nebraska, we'd expect those homicide numbers to be much lower. And it's awful.
As you mentioned that, one of the things coming to mind, I guess, go back to these numbers is that, Melanie, we have to have blunt and candid conversations on these issues. And we also need to look at the demographics and look at that. When I was reviewing your webpage and your reports, there appeared to be no racial diversity on your board of directors and some of your founding members. I have those numbers involved, as you alluded to, African Americans and other people of color, Hispanics, Native American, Asians, and so on in our state. How can Nebraska Against Gun Violence become more inclusive and get those respective community members to buy into your mission and the work that you do?
So it is very true. The founding members were 4 white ladies, 1 gal I went to high school with, 1 I befriended in Lincoln, and a friend of hers from her work. Right. So this is true. Right. This is the origin story. We'll just put it on the table. And we showed up to the most racist policy that, I don't know if it's the most racist policy, but it is certainly up there. a stand your ground bill, which never left committee and it ended up not passing. So that was good. But we were the only people there to oppose it in the whole state. So that was the starting point. So then we looked around and went, oh my gosh, how come nobody's here opposing these terrible things? Right. And this is the same bill. When we showed up, it was after Trayvon Martin had been killed. And his killer was not charged. He does not have a criminal history for killing a 17-year-old kid because of a stand your ground law in Florida. Right. So this is a very serious law, and everywhere it passes, it increases Black homicide. So we certainly need more voices at the table. And I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I am open to ideas, and we're always open to coalition. And some of our most successful practices have really been not falling under the Nebraskans Against Gun Violence kind of brand name, but what we usually end up doing is building coalitions with their own name and their own initiative. Because a lot of people it's a small state with not that many people doing, the hard work in some of these spaces, and they all have their own brands, and they all want to push their own stuff forward. And that, some of that's just kind of how that goes. But I agree. Our board is not all just white people. I will say that. But certainly we need to be more. We need to have more people at the table. We need to be more diverse. I don't think there's any organization that exists anywhere that's doing it perfect, and we're absolutely could be better. Absolutely could be better. And I love that you and I are having these conversations, right? Because there are so few times where people feel safe to really even talk about race and how we all are playing our part and what different groups are doing and what is going on in our communities. And it's hard. So hopefully part of the solution is this conversation we're having right here, and we keep having these conversations.
And also part of the conversation is other people see there's a need to work on these issues, as you've alluded to in this conversation. Excuse me. One of the things I looked at you reviewing your in many nonprofits, they have dubious data. Outcomes are poor or not well defined. What are the three most significant examples of your accomplishment can be measured, including dealing with grass tops and people of color?
So a big thing that is true, and is not true simply because of us, but I do think we certainly have played a hand, is we've seen no significant gun deregulation in this state since we've started in 2015. And around the country, we're seeing things like the removal of training, the removal of background checks, the removal of, they're arming teachers. Like, we're seeing all that across the country. We're not seeing it here. So what that says to me is enough people are hearing the message, whether it's from us, whether it's from national brands. I don't know, but I think we play a part in that. I think we play a part. So we can't claim all the credit, or I don't even know how much, but I think we play a role. Another thing that I'm incredibly proud of is our Nebraska firearm report, and we're in the process of publishing it for 2022. But we published it in 2020, and what we did is we looked at agencies from state to national, everywhere we could find data, and said, do they have a Nebraska? Do they break it out by state? And if you want to do this yourself, you have to go to the CDC, the FBI, the ATF, the Health and Human Services, Nebraska Crime Commission, right? This is really hard data to get it all together, and we put it all together. And so I'm really proud of that. And it's all just, it's all very straightforward, and it gives you I think it gives you the first in the state, a 360 look about where guns and their role in our state. Right? We intentionally didn't conclude a lot of things, kind of leave that up to the people who want to look at the data and use the data. We think people are intelligent, and we think if we empower them with the tools and resources, they're going to know how best to use it. So we really were pretty careful about that. And so I'm wildly proud of that work. There are very few state reports like it across the nation. We modeled ours off of Tennessee. And then I think Utah has created a report after we did. And they were very inspired by Tennessee and then us. So that's another accomplishment I'm really proud of. I'm also very proud of, we did in Lincoln, after the Parkland shooting at the high school in Florida, they were going to expand school resource officers by a lot. And we built a huge coalition of all these different groups and then people that were unaffiliated with groups. And we were able to not stop the expansion, but we slowed it down. They didn't put in as many police as they wanted to. And then they created a system of accountability for law enforcement, schools in the city. And then that model was then taken by Senator Patty Pansing Brooks, who then passed it at the state level. And so there is now a system of accountability. I don't know that anybody's actually being held accountable. And that is a project that we actually want to take on in the next year. But that system exists. And so I'm really proud of that as well.
Mhm. Well, the other thing, and I'll add this as a little caveat, I was reading something in the paper U-Turn. It's a group that deals with gang violence and stuff like that, where they had a picnic or they had some event out there. And when I worked at Douglas County, at one point, one of the ministers was talking about giving them $900,000 of federal money. And I don't even know if they knew about it, but we have to be careful when we throw money at a nonprofit that doesn't have good track record of demographics or outfit. Again, it may sound good, and it's just like the gun buyback, and we'll talk maybe about that. But my point is, we have to be able to engage each other on these sensitive issues and make sure that if organizations are getting federal or state or county or city funds, that they have some demographics to prove that it is working, because too often we do feel good things, and yet at the end of the day, the numbers and things that we talk about in your report continue to go up. I was going to ask you, I noticed, and you talked about just earlier, Melanie, but I noticed Nebraska was involved in the stand your ground law and open concealed laws and stuff like that. Why are those two programs or proposals problematic to your organization? And again, you alluded to it a little bit earlier that we're above the curve a little bit in that area, but why are those two so significant or important? Those two laws.
Which two policies?
Well, the stand your ground and concealed weapon laws. Again, you guys have been involved in some of that, but why are they important? Let's say nationally or in any organizations that's trying to reduce gun violence. And what I'm asking you to do is deconstruct it to the point that even a 7-year-old can understand what we're saying. Why is that important, or is it important?
Well, let's start with stand your ground, because a lot of people have heard of it, but they don't really know what it is. So stand your ground, what it says is, let's back up one more step even. The current standard is you have to actually be in physical danger. And if that's true, you can kill somebody if you are in physical danger and you cannot get away.
That sounds like police officers saying that all the time over the years with Black folks. I mean, literally. I mean, that's what that sounds like.
Really? Well, police are special because they have immunity, right? They have all these, but this is about regular people who are not police. If you can get away, you are legally required to try, if you can, before you kill somebody. Okay, that's the rule. But stand your ground says you only have to feel like you're in mortal danger, and you don't have to run away, even if you can. Okay. Right? So, and who, let's just say it out loud. Who is the majority of this state is white people.
Right.
Who are they afraid of?
Right.
Black men.
Right? Like, right. And I had a former boss say to me one time, and I was surprised how he put it. He says, one of the reasons why the police officer shot that person because he was afraid of them because they were Black. He just came out and said, he was a white guy who worked at Promise with me, and just came out and said it. I was like, wow. Afraid gives you a right to kill somebody in cold blood?
That's what stand your ground policy is. You don't have to run away, and you only have to feel like you are in danger. You don't have to actually be in danger. So those are the two components of a strong stand your ground law.
Gotcha.
right? And what that means and what has happened, and these aren't my opinions, right? Like this is, we can back this up in all the states. As soon as you pass it, Black homicide numbers go up. And like we talked about before, they're already 4 times the rate of any other population in the state. So it is absolutely a racial justice issue to be opposed to that policy. So that's that policy. The other piece is concealed carry laws. And what concealed carry means is to have a gun under your clothes. You have to have some kind of background check, some kind of training component. And that is, and then a license that comes from the state saying you've met these various pieces, right? So let's break that down a little bit. One, people say, well, what if it's outside my clothes? Why should there be a difference in policy? Well, you're right, there shouldn't be. And actually, Omaha has a city ordinance, and you can't open carry without having your concealed carry license. And that's why you don't see a lot of people open carrying, because the people who open carry don't want to get training and they don't want to be background checked.
Why is that?
Because freedom? I don't know. Because they're entitled to full breath, is my opinion. But so here's the thing. If you're going to have people bring guns to the grocery store with them, around, who else is at the grocery store? Your grandma? Your kids? That lady on the cart who can't walk and she has to use the motorized? So all of these people are at the grocery store and we're all together buying cornflakes, doing what we're doing, right? So if you want to bring a gun into that situation, the idea that you don't owe me some sort of standard that you know you can prove at some point you learned how to use a gun and that you are not violent. You don't have a record of violence. That anyone would think that they don't owe that to the community is just so ludicrous to me. You know, like, of course you owe that to the community. Of course you owe it to the community. And what we know, and also because we can see this in all the states that have repealed concealed carry requirements, when you remove these requirements, background checks, and you remove training requirements, you see gun violence increase.
Okay.
Because what happens? People bring guns in more places because they're allowed. More people participate. They get mad about something stupid. They're like, oh, look, I saw someone shoplifting. I'm going to kill them.
Wow.
Right? This is what happened.
Well, I do know you have irrational people. And matter of fact, I remember years ago when I was teaching at Methodist College, we were talking about violence and guns and police officers. And I think it had been one of those many countless examples where a police officer shot an unarmed person. And one of my students made a comment, well, they shouldn't have run from the officer. Again, it justified in that person's brain that that person should die. And you oftentimes hear people who will rationalize that just because a person's law enforcement, they can do no wrong. All of a sudden, we got a reality check when George Floyd was murdered and cold by a police officer in a forum and involved in that case. I'm going to switch up and ask you a different kind of a question. There's a coalition of Nebraska residents organizations who are in support of nonviolence and non-militarization of schools and so on and safety. Why is that important, and particularly in dealing with schools? Why are you guys collectively, people are against this, bringing the military mentality into school buildings and stuff like that?
I'm really excited to talk about this. So the moment I heard the very first headline coming out of Texas and Uvalde, the moment I thought, oh my God, they're going to put more police in our school. They're going to use more of our public money designed for caretaking and helping, and they're going to use it for criminalizing and incarceration. That the moment I heard of them, I knew they were going to do. And we're a couple months in since that happened. We know 400 law enforcement officers were there, and they didn't.
400? Wait, hold it, back up.
Yeah.
I didn't see 400 on TV. You said there was 400 law enforcement when those little kids were being murdered And they're sitting there
Absolutely.
looking at their watches and stuff.
There were 400 from every agency in the region, including ICE, sheriffs, police, like at every level of government, anybody with a law enforcement team sent everybody to the scene, and they didn't do anything.
Wow.
And we can't even imagine in this country how you resolve a problem without police. We just can't even imagine.
Wait, Melanie, let me interrupt and ask a question. Are you saying, in a sense, we're not smart enough to address these issues unless they're at the table when they're basically for safety and law protection on a different level? You're saying that we lack the intellect as a society or group or community to solve some of these issues without involving law enforcement?
We lack the intellect. I think we're just so used to doing what we've done.
Okay, got you.
We need interrupters to stand up and say, hey,
okay,
this doesn't make sense. Can we try a new path? And who's going to say it? Well, I'm going to say it for one. You're going to say it for two. And we need to grow those interrupters who are in all kinds of different places.
What's an interrupter, by the way? What do you mean when you use the word interrupter? I don't know if everybody knows what an interrupter is. What does that mean?
I think it can range from, a protester shutting down traffic with signs proclaiming a message, like they're just literally shutting down the city, to someone having a meeting with people in power and saying, hey, we need to slow down what you're doing, and we need to come up with some other ideas here because the path you're on isn't working out for me. Right? It ranges between all of those. And I'm not going to tell anybody, you search your heart, you go where you need to go, and we'll get there, right? But it takes all the different strategies working at the same time. But that's what I mean by interrupter. People who have taken a minute to go, maybe law enforcement isn't the answer to guns in school. Maybe the answer is something else. Because 400 cops didn't do it. When the Parkland shooting happened in Florida, there was a school resource officer. He was hiding. Well, here's the thing. After he was hiding, because he was afraid for his life, which is a natural human response. I don't even judge that guy. I don't know if I would like to think I'm the kind of person who would run into danger and save the kids, but none of us know unless we're there. So I don't judge him, but I do judge 400 collective cops who all did nothing, that there were no heroes in the bunch, but that's a little different. But after the Parkland with the one guy, all the police agencies around the country said, you can guarantee that's not going to be us. And then you go look at a state like Texas. They have basically no gun laws of any sort of real. Everybody's armed everywhere all the time. They all think they're cowboys. They all think they're heroes. And none of them are, right? So more guns wasn't the issue. More cops wasn't the issue. Maybe it's assault weapons. Maybe letting people have assault weapons whenever they want for any reason they want. Maybe that's a problem. But we don't ever want to talk about the guns. We never want to talk about the guns. We're always like, well, maybe if that kid could have seen a counselor.
Okay, I see what you're saying. In other words, we keep using subterfuge, we keep moving to different areas. Let me switch up if I can. And what is your organization relationship with law enforcement, such as the Omaha Police Department, the county sheriff, FBI, state patrolling organization? By the way, I had a chance to visit the FBI office for the first time in my life, probably a few months ago, and I was shocked at how white it was, how insular it was to dealing with the African-American community, and how incompetent they were in terms of doing community outreach. But my question to you is, what is your perspective? And I didn't say that as a leading to what your answer, but what is your specific relationship with law enforcement in our state?
Sure. So, I don't know that we're always on the same page as law enforcement. In fact, we're often not. In part of our firearm report, we discovered that the Omaha Police Department does not report their domestic violence data.
Why not?
Who knows? What they said Chief Schmatter said was, "Oh gosh, we just didn't even realize we were supposed to be doing that. Sorry."
Wait. I thought we were accredited on national law enforcement agency. Don't accreditation make you report some of that data to the FBI or other sources, domestic violence folks or whoever?
I don't know. But what they did was they sent, and well, here's the thing too, is Omaha Police Department chief, he's on the committee that publishes the report that he didn't know he was supposed to report to.
Wow.
All right. So, take that as you will. Well, then this year, the report this is not, I haven't even gotten my head fully around all the data, but I've been waiting for the Crime Commission to put out their report this year. I went and looked. I immediately went to Douglas County so I could find the Omaha Police Department. Lo and behold, they didn't report.
Even after all this admonishment conversation, they still didn't report?
They still didn't report.
They said they're one of the best in the country.
I know. They had an investigative piece in the Omaha World Herald last year. The Omaha World Herald put out an editorial, because it was a big deal. This is well known that they didn't report. It was Wendy DeBoer, a senator from Omaha. She did a legislative resolution researching the issue, working with the Crime Commission in Omaha to try to figure out what are the barriers so that they could report next go round. They didn't do it. So,
wow.
I would say law enforcement is not super pleased with our position on school resource officers. We think we need them out of school.
And why is that? Why do you want to kick kids out of school? Some people say they're role models and they help kids understand the importance of why law enforcement should be in our society.
Would question why the police only role models we're raising up to children if we need role models in our school. If we need role models in our schools, why can't they be doctors?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Why can't they be firefighters?
Right.
Why can't they be parents of the children that attend the school?
Right. Well, I understand.
This is if children need role models, and I'm not disputing that they don't. Of course, children need role models of adults that they can look at, that look like them, who they can see themselves in and say, maybe that's a path I want to take. Why do we only raise up one profession when we think about role models? And we're all, we're really talking about boys here. Let's just call it out. Let's say it. Let's not make it a dog whistle. Just say we're talking about wayward boys that we want to grow up and be valuable community members that don't hurt girls and women, that they hold responsible jobs and they contribute to society. That's what we're looking for, and not in any particular sector of society, right? We worry about boys all across the demographic spectrum. And so if that's what we're looking at, there are men in lots of jobs that would make fantastic role models.
Right. Now I hear you. And it makes sense, because the other thing I would argue is, why bring in a Magic Johnson or these so-called celebrities who have dubious behaviors, privately, ethically, whoever. And again, I'm not picking on Magic, but we all don't need to be basketball players, and they don't need to come in here and reap up the income from Nebraska, and then the next thing they're out there and we still got the same stupid asinine behaviors and dysfunctional behaviors in our community. I'm going to switch up again. Do you have any dealings with academic departments such as UNO Criminal Justice Department? You alluded earlier to the Crime Commission. I assume they're in Lincoln. Don't know much about them. And also, how do they engage you on your research and your data or things dealing with anti-gun violence? So I'm asking you about more of the academic side of these so-called people who should be collecting all this data, making our jobs a lot more easier to prove our point or make our arguments.
I tell you what, I have been recently following a lot of academics on Twitter in the space around criminalization, children that are really kind of in that academic space. And I'm finding out there's all these people in Omaha that I didn't even know about. So I'd say we're not doing anything together, probably because we just don't even know each other.
Wow.
Again.
And Melly, that's one of the issues I'm arguing. that's one of the issues why I'm arguing why we need to have conferences and workshop, because it reminds me of ships passing in the dark, or you got the Titanic behavior going out there, and you may have somebody who has the skill set to throw out some rescue boats, and you and I both know, coming from middle income backgrounds or in living in middle income, let's say living in middle, you're going to get certain kind of information in your neighborhood that you wouldn't get elsewhere that's informal. So if you got the academic community getting off their hands and stop sitting in the corners and postulating esoteric articles on the Aborigine mouse in Australia and doing regular dig into the weeds in Omaha, some of the silly, stupid stuff we see here would dissipate. So that's one of the reasons I really wanted to see if there's a better way to bring these conferences where you bring academicians, practitioners, grassroots, parents, all kinds of people, at least once a year, to talk about how do we use our best practices and how do we learn from each other and rub up against each other so that we can help our community become a better community or a better state or a better city, whatever. So that's part of what I'm leading to in raising that kind of a loaded question.
Well, first of all, I love academics. I want to just say I love academics. I love people who are so geeked out on some kind of topic that they take it all the way to the PhD and they just keep on digging around in that little tiny little sphere of the world. And I actually married a professor. So I love academics and I love the way their brains work, and I just love that. But you're right. We're not all connecting, and we, like a conference, let's plan it. Let's figure out who needs to be in the planning committee and let's make it happen. We'll do it in March. Like, let's do it. I'll commit $5,000 towards the effort right now. Let's do it.
Are you saying that facetiously, or literally you throw $5,000 and put people in the same room to talk about some of the stuff we're talking about today?
Do that. I can't think of anything more valuable. And here's the thing. When we are talking about guns, let's bring it back to guns for a minute. What do you see in the media? You say, well, here's the side that's pro-gun, and here's the side that's anti-gun. Those are ridiculous statements, and any reporter who talks like that needs to be ashamed of themselves, and they need to go to our website and look about how to talk about gun violence in the media. We actually have from Media Matters, who is a well-respected organization on how to cover important topics in the media. So they should do that too. But the sides of this topic are people who have been impacted by violence, doctors, researchers, first responders who have to clean up pieces of bodies out of our communities, right? From suicide and homicides, right? Those are the sides. The people who are like, freedom, I want to take shooting and I want to bring a gun with me to the grocery store and bump a kid's head with the butt of my gun and not even say sorry, which happened to a friend of mine, her kid. They don't have a side. They are not reputable people in our community, and they do not get to tell us how we're going to live together in peace.
Yeah.
That is violent. And we don't have to accept that as 50% of the space in the room. We absolutely do not.
God, appreciate it. We're down to our last question. I want to ask you, do you have any closing comments for our viewing or listening audience, Melanie?
I want to talk to more people. I want more people talking to each other. I want us going across racial lines and having hard conversations, because guns and racism, we've barely even scratched the surface. How do we untangle police enforcement of laws, and then also our desire to live free of gun violence? What does that look like? Because I'll tell you, at the state legislature, they're constantly saying up there in Lincoln, we can't have gun laws because police are racist. But they don't say that about any other laws. Just those ones, because really what they want to do is they want everybody armed, and they know who is shorted at the end. It's not the people they're promising to protect at the beginning, because those are lies. That is propaganda. It's all nonsense. But we also really do have a police violence problem, right? So like that's a real problem, but not doing anything about guns is not the solution. Right? There are harder solutions that we have to use more creativity. We've got to think deeper, and we've got to talk to each other. And we've just got to have these hard conversations, and we got to bring in more people into the room and listen and talk and listen and just keep on working. Wow. Because I believe in peace. I firmly believe.
I really appreciate that, Melanie, on that point. But before I want to throw out a little story or comment that I want to share related to violence and guns. Is we had Tariq Al-Amin come to my Black Studies class years ago. We used to always invite because he was one of the only a few African-American police officers on the force who pushed back at the system. He worked there for 25 years and never got promoted once. And I asked him the question for the classroom, why did he get promoted? He said, because I called my boss an idiot many times in his private time. But the story he shared is that they were going to do a raid one day. I don't know if they were serving a warrant or whatever, but they had to go up a group of some steps. And he said they had all these interagency police law enforcement, like the state patrol type, sheriff, you name it. And one of the guys asked him to go up front, and he's an African-American guy. Most of these guys were all white. And he refused. He told the classes, I'm only saying this in his name because he made it public. He says, I was afraid some of my officers would shoot me in the back or shoot me and say, I'm going to accidentally discharge. The whole classroom busted out laughing again. But he also had a little humor in the way he put that is a possibility. And then when you have the history that you talked about, what we talked about, we have to be careful with guns because, again, it could have been an accident. It may not have been. And we have too many cases of senseless deaths behind someone not taking precaution to deal with these conversations. So I really appreciate you coming on today. As you know, this is an issue we're going to have to come back and revisit, but really appreciate you being with us with more and talking about anti-violence and gun violence in our state and in our communities and our city. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we hope you've enjoyed this edition, and we hope you come back and see some of our other information that we have to talk about gun violence and how we can deal with it. And we obviously will bring Melanie back and continue the conversation. So thank you very much. As we always say, Baroko.